Hi everyone, welcome or welcome back to Misinformation in Science and Society. Here to listen, not to judge. I'm your host Annie, and today with us we have Daniel Munro. Okay, so could you please introduce yourself a little bit and what you do?
Yeah, so my name's Daniel Munro. I'm a postdoctoral fellow in the philosophy department at York University in Toronto. And my research is focused on the imagination and the role that the imagination plays in how we learn new things about the world, things like that. Recently, I've been especially focused on how the imagination might be involved in driving the spread of conspiracy theories online and misinformation more broadly.
Yeah. So why did you choose this career initially?
Um, I think it kind of goes back to when I first started taking philosophy courses as an undergraduate student in university, and I was just really struck by, philosophers like to ask really deep questions about how the world works and our place in the world as humans,
Mm-hmm.
and those sorts of questions really grabbed me from right from the beginning. Um, and so I wanted to kind of be like my philosophy professors and get to do similar research and teaching and things like that. And so I've always just been interested in philosophy ever since I first discovered it as a student.
Mm-hmm. And what's your favorite part of doing what you do now?
One great thing about philosophy is that um, you can sort of take it and apply it to a whole bunch of different areas. So I started out thinking about just sort of what is the imagination and what does it do for us in kind of a really basic general sense. And then from there, I thought, well, conspiracy theories and that sort of stuff seems to be a really kind of important topic right now. Let's see if we can kind of take what I've been doing and apply it to that. And so philosophy is really flexible in that way because it's a discipline where you can kind of get into the philosophy of whatever area you might be interested in.
Yeah, of course. So why do you think truth is so important, and why do you think misinformation is such a big issue right now?
Mm. Why is truth so important? That's a very philosophical question. Um, so I think the reason that it's important is because, what's true is what allows us as, a community or a society to be able to coordinate our actions and cooperate with each other, right? So if we can all agree on what's true, then that can guide how we um, act and interact with each other. We've got a baseline in terms of like, this is what we're trying to achieve. This is how we'll get there. Without that, we'd all be just acting in different ways because we can't agree on what's actually true and what really exists in the world, right?
Hmm.
Does that make sense as an initial answer to that question? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, so when it comes to misinformation, then, especially in the political realm, right? We see a lot of the kinds of far-fetched conspiracy theories that tend to circulate on the internet these days
Hmm.
are about, uh, politicians in the U.S. especially. They'll say things like Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton are, killing children and eating them and those sorts of things, right? And there's these really wild conspiracy theories out there that I think if we can't agree on whether that's true or not, then
Hmm.
we lose the ability to even have political discussions with
Yeah.
each other in the first place. Right? Because if two sides have such wildly different views about what the truth is, then
Hmm.
how are we ever even gonna have a conversation?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So could you go into a little more depth about um what you specifically do? Uh I know you mentioned it before, but and so how do you try to I guess how your work deals with misinformation, conspiracy theories, and just more specifically your work, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think it's really easy for those of us who aren't conspiracy theorists to
Hmm.
look at, and I tend to focus on the most kind of extreme, wild conspiracy theories that sound like fantasies, right? And
Hmm.
it's easy for those of us who aren't conspiracy theorists to look at those sorts of people who believe those sorts of things and say, oh, they're just like totally crazy and different from me, and like
Mhm.
I don't even want to talk to them, right? Um, but if we want to make progress on, counteracting the spread of misinformation, I think we need to be able to understand why people start to believe it and maybe figure out why they're not so, in a lot of ways they might not be so different from us. We have to try to put ourselves in their shoes and understand
Mhm.
how people get into this sort of stuff in the first place. Um, so what I try to do in a lot of my work is say, well, what would make someone so attracted to such crazy conspiracy theories in the first place? And I
Mhm.
think a lot of what gets people into conspiracy theories is stuff that any of us can understand. So if you think about how conspiracy theories are like, they're good stories for one thing, right? Like you can imagine the plot of like a film or a political thriller or something like that that has these sorts of plot points as a narrative, that you can imagine it being something that people want to go to the movie theater to watch and that they spend money on, right? So
Yeah.
you can see why people would get into those sorts of stories in the first place and find them entertaining. And I think any of us can understand that, even if we're not a conspiracy theorist, right? So thinking about things in that way starts to close the gap a little bit between us and the other side in that sense, and
Mhm.
helps us kind of get into their mindset and understand where they're coming from.
Yeah.
Um, and in my work, I specifically, like I said, focus on the imagination. And when we engage with fiction, like, watching a movie or reading a book, um, we are we use our imaginations a lot, right, to fill out the story, to imagine what's going on in the story you're reading. And
Mhm.
so I think that has a lot to do with what's going on in case of conspiracy theories too. They're reading these interesting, crazy stories and they're imagining that they're true, and maybe that is how people kind of start to get into them in the first place.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, yeah, I think that's really interesting. And so, what do you think like the worst type of misinformation would be? Like, I know, or like worst types of like conspiracy theories, I guess, because you talked about like politically and um, would you say that's like the worst type because of like how much impact it has and stuff like that?
Yeah, so I that's a really good question. It's hard to measure exactly what's going to have the most harm and impact, but for me, some of the worst are um, the ones that have to do with like medical
Mhm.
misinformation. So things around vaccines, for example. So recently, people have said, the COVID-19 vaccines are full of microchips that they want to implant in us to control us and things like that. Bill Gates is trying to control everybody with the vaccine. I'm sure you've heard all these sorts of things.
Mhm.
Um, so things like that, because they might encourage people not to get vaccinated, not to get their children vaccinated, they can have a real impact on the community more broadly.
Mhm.
Because you can see if I believe there's certain conspiracy theories that don't really affect the way I act day to day that much. Like if I think Hillary Clinton is evil, well, I'm already voting for someone else anyway, so it doesn't necessarily affect my day-to-day actions. But something like medical misinformation, I think, can have a lot more impact on how I act in my day-to-day life, and also then with something like vaccines, because it's really like a community issue, and if I'm not vaccinated, that could affect others around me, and it kind of snowballs in that way.
Mhm. Yeah, for sure. What's like some of like the what are some of the conspiracy theories you've been like looking at? I'm just curious, like, um, yeah, like which ones are like the most like interesting or like uh craziest that you've like looked at, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I tend to, like I said, I look at kind of the most crazy
Yeah,
ones typically,
so
the ones that capture the imagination.
mhm.
Um, so I mean, a big one lately has been QAnon. So right, this is the idea that Democrats and like Hollywood elites, these sorts of like left-wing elites in the US especially, are uh, running this big, you know, child abuse and murder ring, and they're killing children and drinking their blood and all this sorts of stuff. And Donald Trump is on the side of the people who are fighting against this, and they're going to have,
Mhm.
you know, Clinton and these other Democrats arrested and executed for their crimes against children and things like that. Um, so that's one that I'm interested in. An offshoot of that. So I live in, like I said, in Toronto. I'm up in Canada.
Yeah.
We've had some influence of that QAnon thinking trickling into Canada as well. So there's this woman in Canada named Romana Digilo, and she has claimed to be the Queen of Canada because she says that, like, Donald Trump and these people who are fighting against the evil Democrats have well, now, I mean, the Queen Elizabeth just died recently, but before this, before that, before she actually did pass away, this woman, Romana Digilo, was claiming that the Queen had been executed and now she's the Queen of Canada. And she's going to be, arresting the Prime Minister of Canada and having him executed again for these like crimes against humanity that she said he was
Mhm.
committing. And so she's been doing things like telling her followers to arrest the police. So she had a bunch of them go out and go to a police station and forcibly try to arrest the cops themselves. And
Mhm.
of course, you can imagine that didn't go well. The cops turned around and arrested them.
Okay.
So she's really been getting people into real trouble in that way because she's having them go out and do things that get them arrested, or she told them to stop paying their water and electricity bills, so they had power cut off to their houses. So
Mhm.
um, she's been stirring up a lot of trouble up here in Canada.
Yeah, it's just like the influence that people can have on like other people and yeah. Um, where do you like find all these like conspiracy theories like or do you just like hear them from people or do you like look for them or yeah, like
Yeah, I rely a lot on the work of journalists, I guess, are often the people who uncover this sort of stuff to begin
Mhm.
with. So academics like me, we're not, well, at least people who work in philosophy like me, we're not going out and actually uncovering this stuff
Yeah.
ourselves. We rely on people who are really doing the investigations and going out and talking to people,
Mhm.
and doing that like on the ground research. So there are definitely certain like news publications that I think do a great job of that. And then once that reporting has been done, people like me are able to, read that sort of stuff in the news and sort of think about, well, what are the bigger picture philosophical implications and how can we try to understand what's going on here?
Yeah, yeah. Okay. So what do you think about what do you think would be like the best thing or like some good things that like regular people can do to like eliminate or avoid or reduce like misinformation? Because and a lot of like big companies or like whatever, they have like a huge impact. And they can like spread things really quickly and stuff. But what can like we as like people as like regular people, I guess, like do to like help with that?
Yeah, I think, well, this goes back to something I said earlier about kind of trying to maybe understand and find common ground with people who believe in misinformation. So if you're someone who has, um, a friend or a family member who's really caught up in this stuff, and you're thinking like, how should I approach talking to that person? What
Mhm.
can I do? Um, One thing that, psychologists who study this stuff have said is you don't want to go in like arguing against them right away and just saying, you're crazy. Why do you believe this? That's false. Because typically, the the effect that will have is people will just sort of throw up their defenses and dig in their heels and not engage with you, and they might end up coming away uh, believing it even more than they did before.
Yeah.
Um, because people's beliefs in this sort of stuff, they associate it very closely with their values and their identity, and beliefs like that, if you try to argue against them, people often end up just increasing their confidence in their initial beliefs.
Mhm.
So it can backfire in that way. Um, so I think what's more effective then is trying to find some way of relating to them so that they see that you kind of understand where they're coming from.
Mm,
Um, and so part of that is, trying to imagine what it's like to be them. What are they feeling? Why are they interested in this stuff in the first place? Um, and then sort of from there, if you can do that, then hopefully that will encourage them to also sort of see things from your side, right? If we sort of approach each other with respect in trying to see things from each other's perspective, I
hmm.
think that could be the first step then in having someone see where you're coming from and then understanding why what they believe might actually be wrong.
Yeah, yeah. I think, yeah, I can totally see like, or I guess I can see that in my daily life too, like when I'm like talking to people or like when my parents are talking to me instead of that, like, if they just start off like arguing or like, being like that's not right, then I'm just like, okay, whatever, like, but like if they actually like try to like talk about it and like understand my perspective and stuff, I'm like more likely to like, listen and also like discuss with them, I guess. So,
Yeah, like people don't like to be told that they're wrong right away,
yeah,
right? Like I think if you tell people that, they just get defensive and they disengage. So in the end, it's not productive. Yeah.
makes sense. Yeah. Okay, so I think those are like all my questions about like misinformation. So just for fun, um, what like inspires you? Um, is there like, I don't know, like a book, a person, an idea, like what what inspires you?
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I'm really inspired by um I guess um other philosophers who are doing really good work. Like I tend to get my inspiration from, colleagues who have written cool stuff, cool research about these sorts of topics.
Oh,
So I could recommend, a couple people in case anyone's interested in
sure.
going and reading more. One of my favorite philosophers working right now is T Nguyen. So that's his first name is Thi. His last name is Nguyen. Um, and he's written a lot of cool stuff on things like how social media works, how online communication works, how
Mhm.
echo chambers form online, things like that. And so I've taken a lot of inspiration from his work. Um, Another philosopher I really admire is Regina Rini. So her last name is Rini. She also actually works at York University, where I am right now, and she's written also about like social media and misinformation and things like that. And she's someone else whose work that I really admire. So, a lot of doing academic work is just reading a lot of what other people have already said, and then sitting and thinking about how to extend the conversation and put my own work into dialogue with what they're doing. So that's always, yeah, a good source of inspiration.
That's awesome. Um, do you have any advice for people, especially like teens? Um, it can be either like about information or just like in general.
Um, yeah, I mean, I think start partly my advice would just be to start. It's good to start early thinking about these sorts of issues. So I think someone like you who's really like getting into this already and thinking about how we can um, take ways to counteract the sorts of crazy stuff that we see going on in the world.
Mhm.
It's like we need we need people to actually care and not just like sit back and let people just think that, oh well, that doesn't concern me, whatever. I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I don't have to care about that, right? Because it's like I said, some of these things really do affect all of the whole community, right?
Yeah,
So I think like you know becoming engaged politically, engaged with this sort of stuff early on, thinking about how you can make a difference, and then eventually when you go on to university and things like that, if you've already been thinking about these sorts of issues, you'll be able to make even more of an impact. So I think it's good. It's always good to start thinking about these things from a young age.
for sure, for sure. All right, thank you for this, and thank you for being here again. It was really nice talking to you. And yeah.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
All right. Have a good rest of your day.
You too.